How firm a foundation. Just hearing those 4 words to the hymn's title immediately brings the tune and the rhythm and the melody of this hymn into my head. So I'm going to work really hard to read the verses for us in a way that doesn't immediately bust into the hymn's rhythm. I'll probably not be successful, and I hope you'll forgive me. But this is a song I've heard since I was a little girl in the pews, before I could read, before I could understand how verses and songs and hymnals worked, that you read the top line of each stanza. And so I will do my best. But here we go. How firm a foundation. Verse 1. How firm a foundation, ye saints of the Lord, is laid for your faith in God's excellent word. What more can be said than to you God hath said, to you who for refuge to Jesus have fled? How firm a foundation. Us, the saints of the Lord, is laid out for us in Scripture, in God's excellent holy word. Nothing more needs said to us than what is already found in Scripture. If you spend any time in the Gospels, you know that Jesus frequently quoted Scripture. It was an excellent word to him, a word that he constantly pulled from to teach us more about God and who God is. And if that was a refuge for Jesus as he walked this earth, surely it is an excellent reference point and refuge point for us. The next 4 verses, number 2 through number 5, are all in quotation marks. And I've always imagined this to mean that God was speaking these verses to us specifically. So verse 2, hear it not in my voice, but in God's voice, says this. Fear not, I am with thee. O be not dismayed, for I am thy God, and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand, upheld by my righteous, omnipotent hand. Fear not, God tells us, I am with you. Don't be dismayed, don't be afraid, don't be worried, for I am your God, and I'll still give you aid. Still there to me reminds me that even in my worst moments, even in my worst days, there is nothing that's going to stop God from giving me aid. Still doesn't mean that I've run out, but that in spite of myself and despite the terrible, horrible things that I do, God is still going to care for me. God's still going to aid me. God's still going to propel me forward. God tells us, I'll strengthen you, help thee, I'll cause you to stand, upheld by my righteous, omnipotent hand. Omnipotent means unlimited power. God is saying, my hand knows no end of its strength, no end of its power, and that is what's supporting you. So, fear not. Verse 3, also in quotations. When through the deep waters I call thee to go, the rivers of sorrow shall not overflow. For I will be near thee, thy troubles to bless, and sanctify to thee thy deepest distress. God here is telling us that when you go through the deep waters, God is calling us there. If you heard Sunday's sermon, you know that I shared that sometimes I think God calls us into the storms or brings the storms forth because we have things we need to learn, and going through the storm is the only way to do that. I feel that that's the same thing God's saying here, that sometimes we have to go into the deep waters. Sometimes that's where God calls us, that's where God leads us. We have to go there to be faithful. And the second part of that is the rivers of sorrow shall not overflow. Rivers have banks, right? And what I hear God telling us here is that when you are called to the river of sorrow, God is not going to allow that river to overflow its banks. It's going to be awful. It's going to be brutal. You are going to be consumed by the flow and the depth of that river of sorrow. But it is going to be confined, and God is with you. For I will be near you, your troubles to bless, and sanctify to you the deepest distress. Your deepest distress, our deepest distress, God is going to make holy. That's what sanctify means. He's going to bless our troubles and sanctify, make holy our distress. When through fiery trials thy pathway shall lie, my grace all sufficient shall be thy supply. For the flame shall not hurt thee, I only design thy dross to consume and thy gold to refine. Again, when your path through which you're being led by Christ goes through the fiery trials, God's grace, which is more than sufficient, will be our supply, will be our support through those fiery trials. The flame, though it is all around us, like Daniel, will not consume us. And God designs for the the rubbish to be consumed, and the gold, the gold to be refined. Think of this as like a pruning, right? Sometimes we have to go through the storms, the fiery trials, to have the extra things, the rubbish, the dross around us be consumed so that we can emerge a new, refined, better person. The fifth and final verse is also a quotation. The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not desert to its foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, I'll never, no never forsake. The soul that Jesus leaned on for repose, for rest, God is not going to desert it to its foes. That soul, our soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, to break, to tear it down, God is never going to forsake. A firm foundation reminds us that God, through these quotations, is never ever going to abandon you. Lead you into hard times? Quite possibly, but never ever, never forsake.